It's to Mladen's credit that the conversation tonight has evolved. So first, I want to start by understanding a bit of context. How many of you are actually students? Excellent. Excellent. So from some of the students, you read the title, you read the abstract. What is it you expected to hear? Who's first? I've got an hour, so who's first? What did you expect to hear about the data tsunami? Either one.
Well, I think recently I came across this thing about the healthcare data integration. So I was just imagining that is this going to talk a little about how this integration will actually take place, and also about the distributed, how distributed, in a distributed way can you manage the data?
Excellent. I'll get half of it right. All right. Who's next? Someone from over here. You're here because somebody told you to come, or you wanted to learn something? Someone, come on. There we go.
We have gained such an incredible amount of data in such a short amount of time. So is that the tsunami that you're referring to?
It is. It's an interesting question of whether it's any different now in current terms of our technology than the same problems people faced a decade ago, 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago as we look at the technology shifts. What else? All right, I'm going to give you a short synopsis, then you can go home. How about that? So, anybody want to venture what movie this is? Excellent. Computer wore tennis shoes.
I'm dating myself.
Yes, you are. 1969 Disney film, Computer wore tennis shoes. Probably the first time that I can actually recall thinking that there was some device called a computer. 4th grade, I don't know whether it was the automation from this or whether there was this idea that a not so smart kid could improve their intelligence by working with a computer. But either way, I landed here at NC State with this idea that I wanted to understand computer science. So tonight, I'd like to set that up by talking a little bit about this area of the tsunami. But to do that, I think effectively, I need to start the context of that conversation. One of the elements that I want to make sure you take out of this is that context is one of the biggest challenges we face. And it doesn't matter whether it's in a single small group or whether it's the data tsunami. So around context, I want to give you a little context about me, right, starting from the 4th grade, why I think like I do, from that view, my view of IT, which isn't really a good view. Right? And from that view, a little bit about where I think analytics puts us today and how we got here. And from that, a little bit about SAS and how we play in this particular space. But more importantly, to challenge our thoughts about what is it we want to do in the curriculum of computer science to address this data tsunami, to address how we deal with integration, to address how we scale appropriately. So that's the course of the conversation. Now, I believe that most social networks actually do best when they're driven off a revenue plan. So Dr. Mladen has the privilege of giving the student that asked the best question tonight. So there's $20 for the best question. All right? You can ask the question.
Former students?
No, current students only. Current students only. Feel free to ask questions during the course of the conversation. And if I use a term you don't understand, or if there's a premise I put forward that you actually don't agree with, feel free to ask the question. So I get up to NC State, 1977. You know, what are we learning? We're learning languages. I got to learn PL1, Fortran, 370 assembler, Forth, APL, Snowball. That's a few of them. Great education around languages, got the constructs, some good software engineering. And that was pretty fun. So what else was happening in that time? Well, along that same time when in computer science we're learning around third-generation languages, compiled languages, and we're learning about software engineering principles, there's another set of languages showing up from other disciplines. Three that I would draw out in that conversation would be specifically Ramis, which was a 4GL that showed up now as Focus, still alive as part of information builders. SPSS as a statistics language, and SAS as a language around statistics. So at the same time, we're learning about transactions and data models and relational databases. They're coming up with ways to think about and analyze analytics and mathematics. At that same time, in IT, we're fixing the plumbing. Okay? We are putting in new manufacturing systems, resource planning systems, and we are pushing through to the rise, the fall, and the rise of enterprise resource planning systems. So we are doing just a fabulous job of putting transactions in the business. We are loading transactions in, we're getting point of sale, we're getting the order entry going. Along that same time, right there around 81, we got many computers going into the plant sites, we're controlling devices, we got microcomputers showing up just on the early desktops, and what's happening? The shift of the very people who understood how to do some of the analytics are leaving IT and going into the business units. We have our first hint that there's going to be this rogue IT developing. We're going to have enterprise IT and business unit IT. And we're pushing along, and right in that same time frame, because we're doing MRC systems and transaction systems, because now we have relational databases. Oh, isn't this fun? Transactions per second, big database, we can do all this. And these guys that now have these query tools that are out in the business unit start hitting the transactional systems. And the first thing that happens is IT goes, oh, that's bad, right? You're hurting my transactional performance that I could calculate because now you're doing ad hoc work, right? And we have a solution for that. We understand relational databases and transactions. We understand third normal form. We will make a copy of all our transactions and put it in an enterprise data warehouse. And that'll be so cool because now you can have all that data you want, Mr. Customer, Mr. Business Unit. But we stuffed all that data in the same form that we had it in our transaction system. And it turns out that isn't the form you need for business analytics at all. So my point here is we really press through ERPs. We get into the late 90s, and Y2K drives tons of funding for IT to put into new systems. So at SAS, we learned that if a salesperson did not get in front of an ERP sale, we could coach them not to go back for 18 months. Because in 18 months, the business units would be screaming for information on how to run their business. And we'd have an opportunity to sell business analytics. So this is part of my view, right? My point of view of where we are at in terms of computer science and IT is we've talked tons about how you get information in. But we've done very little to describe and understand the processes of getting information out. So that's one of the points that I'd like to make sure you take away is what is it we know about our systems today about how we facilitate getting information to the business units and get alignment. One of the constant, and I know this one's a little bit hard to read, but I wanted to get it up here. One of the constant surveys that happens year over year, whether it's Computer World or IDC or Gartner, it's always this discussion about IT alignment with business. And isn't this interesting that we're going into 2010, top 10 business priorities. Improve my business process, reduce my cost, use analytics, improve my workforce, right? Attract and retain customers. Oh, good. Virtualization, cloud computing, Web 2.0, networking, business intelligence. You see the phase mismatch? This is the conversation I want us to have tonight. You know, how do we address that mismatch? It's been going on now for the better part of 3-4 decades of a debate. There's no surprise, right, when in 2003 Nicholas Carr put forward that IT doesn't matter, that there was this big hubbub in the IT community. Oh, you can't be serious. Yes, IT matters. And it does, right? Don't get me wrong, right? The CIOs are charged with a lot of different activities. They have to keep the lights on. They have to secure the data. Right? They have to make sure these transaction systems are running. And it isn't easy. Doug Bush, who was the CIO for Intel, talked about this problem of organizational amnesia. And his point was, we automated a lot of these processes. We gave people email, we got rid of their fax machines, we made it easy for them to get their orders done, and they constantly are squeezing the IT budget. So how in the world do we serve them for the things they want when they're asking us just to keep the lights on and running? My response to that is I believe we've gotten too comfortable. It's too easy to take that woe is me, I can't change my business for the business. Right. Let's take a simple example. Take a telco system. If you can reduce customer churn by just 2 percentage points, right, that is millions of dollars to the bottom line of the company. You spend that exact same investment in improving a billing system, it doesn't even show up on the dial. Right? So we have to think about these issues that are raised here are very important to changing the way the business works. Any questions? Everybody gonna nod their head. Test is coming later. Right? So, what is it that we can do? How do we change the game? Peter Drucker, who has been quoted a lot, he was a prolific writer around management techniques. He was the one that brought us managing by objective to so many of us in the corporate world. Said there were 3 main elements that executive leadership needed to focus on for a business to be successful. The first one, make the present business effective. Be as efficient as possible. Optimize the business as you know it. Second, find the opportunities and the potential of the business. Use what you know to predict and understand opportunity. 3, right, prepare to make the business different than it is today. Use your expertise, discover new opportunity. Interestingly enough, Clayton Christensen had a similar framework. He spoke to this around market phases. And he said there were 3 phases. He said first market phase is innovation. When you create a whole new product. You take expertise and you take information that you have and you create a whole new idea. The second phase of a market shift is when your competitors have started to catch on to that innovative idea you had, is now you have to find areas to sell, deliver that product to beat your competition. Phase 2 matches phase 2 of the potential. Phase 3 says once it becomes a commodity, try again. Once it becomes a commodity, is you have to focus on efficiency and optimizing the business. So 2 people who've written extensively about the business process as well as the market process, really the same 3 frameworks. So that's my catch to say, how does that apply to business analytics? So generally at SAS, we like to talk about the market of business analytics in 8 stages. We find we have to do this because the market hype continues to morph the definition of what business intelligence and business analytics are. So business intelligence in the early 80s was about doing analytics on data. And along came the query and reporting programs that let you actually see what had happened in the past, and they sort of morphed to take on the moniker of business intelligence. Well, now you see an activity going on which is everything's analytics. So we find ourselves in discussing what SAS does with our customers and needing to define the activities. So this is how we define those activities. The bane of all of our existence, standard reports. Right? We get reports, we have this year's objectives, we continue to produce those reports, we get next year's objectives, and we get new reports. And we don't get rid of the old reports. There's an amazing number of servers out there cranking out reports that nobody ever looks at. We get this problem here, and so we go, oh, yeah, let's do ad hoc reports. Because I can't afford to look at all the reports that are being generated, I want to ask the question when I want to. So now we have query systems that let us go ask something about the data, about what happened. Once we can do that, we generally want to drill down the facts. So we have online, right, analytic processing, OLAP. All right, here we go. Right, slice and dice. What a lousy tool to use to make decisions. It's a great tool to find a hypothesis, something that you want to test. But having to sift down and drill down yourself to look at a slice of data without knowing the rest of the framework around it, right, is pretty myopic. And then we've got all this information flow, so now we say we're going to have alerts. All right, so tell me when there's a report I need to pay attention to. Now, anchor that one because I think there's a real problem in what we think of in terms of alert mechanisms and rules engines that we need to have a conversation about. So where do we think you really start to differentiate when you talk about analytics and business analytics? How do you know what the opportunity in your business is if you're running well? Let's just take the quality control processes. How do I know when my process is in control? How do I know what my quality is? Forecasting. Right? Once I know what my opportunity is, how do I look to make sure I can have a good delivery in my supply chain? How do I actually understand my opportunity? How many red shirts do I think I can sell after State beats Carolina? And what's the risk of shirts I won't be able to sell if Carolina beats State? And the last, once again, how do we optimize for efficiency? So here's my pitch. If you want to answer the questions of the business, understand the 3 market dynamics, you want to be able to drive the business forward, this is how we learn to answer those questions. Think about it. If we taught the DBAs and the business intelligence experts in IT the basics of predictive modeling, forecasting, and optimization, how different the conversation would be when they go to the business unit and go, Billy, what data do you need? And their answer is always All of it, right? We're asking the wrong question. Right? What are you trying to do? Oh, I'm trying to reduce churn in my business. Ah, you want to reduce churn. You need to predict the customer behavior, the propensity to buy, or the probability that they're going to leave. Right? Now I know what data I need. I know whether the missing data is important. I know whether the quality of that data is important. I know that it's no longer organized by the transactions in my business. I understand that they're organized completely different. They're wide records, lots of attributes. And the process by which I'm going to use them are very different. So I wanted to give you a few examples to bring some of that home, some of the things that we've been doing at SAS with customers, just so you can attach some value to this idea of using analytics to differentiate our business. So, Philippines, tax service. They are really struggling. Tax revenues were going down, debt was going up. A little analytics to discover fraudulent tax, 114 million. First year they used it. Sweden, using analytics to understand mistakes being made in inpatient care. Not only save significant number of lives, $10 billion in savings. Harris, this is a great one. How many professors in here tonight? You should all aspire to be Gary Loveman. Right? Here's a professor who understood analytics in the scientific process and took that into a business as a consultant, turned it into a COO, and now he is the CEO of the best operating, most profitable casino in the world. You'd like to do that, wouldn't you, Milad?
Oh, I'm way of doing it.
Okay. So what did they do? Some very interesting things here that they did. One was this wallet share. By wallet share, who's spending? Right? So for every dollar of a Harris customer, they get 45% of that dollar in their casino when you're in Vegas as a Harris customer. Puts most of the rest of them at a very big disadvantage. Who is the premier, most profitable customer demographic for a Harris? Somebody want to guess? It's got to be the 20-year-olds, right? Right? It's your 65-year-old grandmother. Right? They're the most profitable gambler in the arena. Gary Loveman does a really great thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, which is control, test, scientific process. There was this constant belief before he showed up that if we just put more one-armed bandits on the floor, we will get more revenue per square foot. They begin to study the flow of people through the floor, using heat maps to see where they collected, to understand what the opportunity is. They actually now know, and they use control and test to show it, that if they reduce the number of machines on the floor to provide some personal space, they put them in the right type of collections, they'll actually drive up the revenue per machine and exceed the revenue per square foot that they were getting before, right? By providing a much more enjoyable experience. 1-800-Flowers. 700 million in flowers and candies a year, using analytics to optimize their marketing spend. So when I just drill into that a little bit, what do I mean when I say drill into to that spend? You have a constrained budget. You have several marketing campaigns you'd like to do. All of you actually don't want to receive the same campaign the same way. Some of you want to get it texted to you on the phone. Some people want to get it via email. Some people want to get it in the mail. So I now have multiple channels with multiple customer preferences, including block. Don't even talk to me at all. I'll call you if I want to. Right? I have campaigns that I project that have a certain lift because I've analyzed who's likely to buy this offer. And I'm budget constrained. So it's taking all those constraints together to optimize the lift on the set of campaigns that you have available to run. So that's what I'm talking about. And you turn that upside down for what you also do for how to optimize my distribution channel. Wet seal, right? High fashion trend for teenage, early tweens. One of the companies you can really say run on analytics. Their goal is to understand the shift of trends on a weekly basis. So this was really to try to give you a feel for, when I talk about predictive modeling, forecasting, and optimization, what that means when we talk about applying that to the business and helping them answer their questions. So what does that mean about the data tsunami? So, yes, we are in a flood of data. There's no doubt about it. All right, the chief scientist for Amazon projected that in 2009, we created more data in 2009 than the whole existence of mankind up to 2009. Okay. Now, in IDC, including these figures, said that in fact, in 97, we crossed the boundary where we actually generated more data than we had storage for the first time. So now we have a problem of we can't even afford to store it all, so how do we get the most information? So the National Security Agency has this problem as they pay attention to every phone call that we have and every email that we send and every transaction that we have, which is how do I focus in the right places? So they want to understand when there's a patient in the system and then bring resources to bear. So you were asking, right, how do we integrate into this? So one of the challenges, one of the opportunities for computer science is how do we dynamically shift focus because we can't afford to look at everything. So this is a real challenge. How do we really address the size and scale of our applications? Let me go back. So you talked about distributed computing, and I do believe this is one of the big issues that we need to face. Right? Is how do we instrument systems using our expertise in computer science to facilitate the application of analytics to deal with the data tsunami? And there are 4 models in general that I think they're important for us to be paying attention to and to understand. And I'll go through a little bit about how at SAS we're beginning to apply some of these. This one's, let's go back here, this one's fairly straightforward. We're able to take an existing SAS process that's easy to partition. Maybe you're partitioning the problem by years, and there's no crossover, so you can analyze 2007 data separate from 2008, separate from 2009, so it's easy to distribute, and we can just connect to the SANs, and we are a big database, and we can crank, and we can still conquer and divide. This one's starting to show up a lot because the time window that people have in the evening to get all the data processed is driving them to use this process. We're also seeing people begin to understand the value of this as you look at cloud. So a lot of people say, oh, the cloud's a lot of hype. Yep, it is. A lot of people would say elastic computing is really important. I'd say it's not just important, it's critical. We already have 2 customers that are using elastic computing to extend out of their own resources into EC2 to run SAS process. So this is a very interesting problem set, and one of the questions is how much of the partitioning can you automate? The second model, one that we actually would have traditionally put directly against the original conversation of a grid. How do I use a lightweight messaging system to distribute processes that are typically compute-intensive, data light? So one of the things that we help banks with is helping them with a lot of risk assessment, understanding the portfolio risks that they face. Specifically, one of those computations is called the value at risk. So in all the meltdown of the financial sector, one of the things they have to do is a lot of stress testing of their portfolio to understand that risk exposure. That traditionally for a large bank would run on the orders of 55 hours. With a grid of about 1,000 nodes, we're running that problem right now in a little under 5 minutes. That is a high compute problem, small data. This problem is the partition data architecture problem. Now, we do a lot of work in the retail space, and in that arena, one of the things we do is we help people do what they call markdown optimization, which is what should I charge as I begin to mark down my retail items. And these large retailers where you talk about, oh, I got a couple thousand stores and maybe 500,000 SKUs, I want to price each one of those individually in each store on a nightly basis. All right. Now, unlike the value at risk problem, this one has terabytes of data. So now I need to find a way to partition the data on a persistent basis and bring the computation to it. This one I find very interesting. I want to drop back a little bit and talk just a bit about the pattern of data processing for analytics. 1968, some very enterprising people that were starting SaaS realized that there was a different processing pattern. And almost all the data access on the mainframe was written for small burst transactions. So they wrote direct raw I/O to the data devices so they could have very large blocks of data for high sequential throughput with fast append. Does anybody recognize a currently highly hyped file system today that represents that exact same pattern? Come on, guys. Nobody's been looking at what Google's doing with their file system? Not a single hand? Right? The Hadoop file system, massive block size, fast append, large record sets. Right? It is exactly what we were doing on the mainframe 40 plus years ago. Right? The big change was doing it on commodity, cheap hardware, partitioning the data to the computation, right, with expected failover. Not unexpected, planned. I'm going to replicate it because it's cheap enough. One goes out, not a problem. That was the big change in that model. The new generation of databases that are out there. Netezza, Greenplum, Astrodata, Exadata, now part of Oracle, Data Allegro, part of Microsoft. These were all shifts, and a very significant shift in the distribution of data to commodity hardware. I absolutely love what Greenplum's done from a marketing message. Enterprise Data Cloud. They stopped fighting this idea that there's going to be one single version of the truth, and we're going to stuff it all in one enterprise data warehouse. They said that's not happening. We're going to create a framework for data marts that it's easy for you to provision for each different business unit, but we're going to let IT have some control. We'll try to reduce the amount of replication, but you can elastically add, right, commodity Intel hardware with disk attached to that to grow it on the fly. That's the type of shift that's occurring in this problem set. Some real interesting problems here, and really hard. This last one, this is the real-time streaming. This is how do we actually understand what's happening in the system process so we actually see the perturbation in the landscape. Now, you know what? We got really good at process control in the 80s, right, using statistical process control, how to understand when a system was out of band. We should be applying that to every information system and every information system that flows out. Why aren't we doing that? But as an industry, we are not paying attention to what we already know about applying analytics to information flows. So these are 4 opportunities. Who's studying these in their curriculum here at State? Is that a problem? I think it is. Right? So what's our opportunities? So the thing that I want to challenge you to think about as you look at your opportunities and what you want to study and where you want to be is, do you understand the core principles of applying analytics to solve business problems? Are you learning how to attach that to the systems that you're building? You know, it's a lot of fun to write a Flash app. It's a lot of fun to write a web-based application. You know, stateless, no real persistence, right? Slick, it's easy. But are you prepared to write the continuous running systems that run across thousands of nodes with planned failover, right, as part of your architecture, design, and training? The last point here, which is not quite on the technology side as much as it is the opportunity to make sure we know how to innovate. Constantly, I see people engage with their customers, and they'll ask the customer, what is it you want to do? Billy, what problem is it you want to solve? Now, unfortunately, Billy, right, can only tell me the scope of his experience. Right? So if he's seen my product or a competing product, he can tell me what he likes about those. Right? But it's not his job to understand the broader scope of the technology. That's your responsibility, right, as an engineer, as a technologist, to understand the opportunity. So we're going to go back to the first phase of the market shift, is how do you apply your understanding, your expertise, to somebody else's problem to innovate? And I want you to take that with you. It will serve you extremely well. Because if you are always just answering the question with their current expectation, you will never make that innovation leap. Right? So 3 things, right? Invest in understanding the basics of analytics. It'll serve you well to answer the business questions. Look for how we scale to this data tsunami to solve these very difficult problems. They are always going to be here. In the 1960s, it was a data tsunami to them because they had the mainframe for the first time. Right? They were collecting data like we never before. You know how SAS started? It was collect agricultural data for the southern states and see how we improve their agricultural conditions and growth of crops in southeast U.S. They had data coming in on paper tape, punch cards, magnetic strips. It was a mess. It is no different than today. It's coming in on, right, disk drives being shipped to EC2 to load up on the Amazon grid. It's coming in, right, directly off the web stream. It's coming in from logs and blogs and Twitters. It's as messy as it ever has been. The problem is the same, but the order of magnitude of what we can accomplish is fantastic. Just this week, we were at Bank of America, part of the team, doing sentiment analysis and text mining on blogs and Twitters to help them understand what the perception is around market campaigns. Those are happening in real time, folks. And they don't want those systems to go down. And this is probably one of the big shifts I'd like for you to understand in business analytics, is it used to be considered that we've got our transactions of our business, and those business analytics, they can run in batch, and they can be put down in the queue, and it doesn't really matter. They'll eventually get an answer. That is not going to be acceptable going forward. These systems answering these questions are more important to the bottom line than tweaking the billing system. So I've either bored you to death or I have you in rapt attention. Right? Are you ready? I'd love to take questions. I didn't really talk much about SAS, so I'll be happy to answer any questions around SAS, some of the systems we're building, some of the designs and architecture. I didn't talk about application design much. I didn't talk much about what we see in terms of data quality and how big an issue that is. But, you know, at 25 years of doing this, and you only give me 60 minutes, it's not enough time. Yes?
Well, I'm just curious. You fairly early on, you mentioned the rise and fall and rise of ERP. What went wrong, and what did you change to get more towards business analytics we have today?
Well, the point I was trying to make in terms of what went wrong is we didn't balance the expectations. We have to have plumbing, right, to make it all work. But we didn't balance the IT budgets to spend as much on getting the information to the business as we did at putting information in. We got very focused on understanding transactions and how wonderful that was. I had several CIOs engaged, one in a pharmaceutical company that said, hey, look, you know, they've got the ERP system and they have some forecasting. Why do I want yours? Right? We could show them a 20-percentage point improvement in their forecast, but the CIO had already invested in these ERP systems and didn't want to spend any budget to improve the business line. So that's the type, it's a rebalancing of our thought about what we need to do.
You had that chart from this month from Gartner,
Yeah.
2 columns, and I'm wondering how much of a disconnect there really is, because you can interpret that left column as the business side asking, telling what they would like to do, and the right-hand side is more like how to do some of those things. So while the executive suite may not be clamoring for cloud computing by that name, probably never will, that may be, in fact, an important avenue towards the technical solutions some of the business side drive.
You could argue that.
Between those 2 columns?
You could argue that. Let's see if we can get back there real quick. Yeah, right? Always about saving money, making life easier for IT, and you could argue that some of those would apply, but
There's a many-to-many mapping, I think.
yeah, sure, but right, but that's the problem. You go to your business guys and you talk about these things. Right? They have a hard time connecting to that. Now, if instead you say, "Look, I'm going to figure out how to improve your churn. I don't have enough capital to run that analysis here, so I'm going to use the cloud to do that." Absolutely, but the loss in connection is when you don't know how you're going to approach and answer their question.
That's the definition of a bad CIO.
Well, now, why do we think so many CIOs are getting kicked out if they just stay on a technology basis, and why are so many new CIOs coming from the business units?
That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
I mean, if you're over there talking about bits and bytes, you're a bad CIO.
Right.
You don't need to
Right.
be doing that anyway.
Yeah, but what I want to have succeed is all of you who come from a technology basis, right, to be the CIO that becomes a critical part of the executive team because you understand the business, not the CIO that's kicked out because you're just talking bits and bytes and don't understand how to relate these problems. That's the trend that I want to shift, because I truly believe that as engineers, we have a better opportunity to innovate in the business than any MBA ever will have. Right?
You are not in the running for the $20.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for the students here, if you had asked how many of them are aware of involved with open source, if they would connect the dots of Hadoop being a significant force out of the open source community and just being aware of some of the trends coming out of there as portenders of where IT may be able to get benefit.
Is that a question to them?
Well, when I heard that, how you committed Hadoop, I don't know that it rang true, but I guess I would encourage you to think about open source because that is some of the leading thinking.
Now we have a whole new topic of conversation, right? Because Keith might premise that most open source are things that have already been proven in the labs at the universities or in most of the systems, and so now they're close to commodity. All right, let's take Linux is close to a commodity. Let's take R as a stat package is close to a commodity. Let's say that Hadoop is actually implementing a pattern we already knew very well, just didn't know how to communicate. So I love to have that debate of whether or not open source is the crown jewel of how we innovate. All right.
Just think of it as an avenue for the students to become more aware of trends and parts.
It is, right? So I challenge you simply because I want people to understand that the innovation opportunities, open source clearly one, accelerates a lot what we do. We embed a lot of open source in SaaS simply because we can't move as fast as some of these areas are today. Because there is a tremendous amount that's coming out and flowing out as open source. It's a great way to look at interest. It's just you have to be careful about whether adoption, and I'll tell you the little story of why that's important to me. My fastest growing expense to ship software, excluding people, is paying for support contracts for open source because the open source community actually revs faster and they don't care much about support. So now I have to pay supports and indemnity plans for software I'm embedding. It's a great revenue model for somebody, not me. Yeah. You're on the lead here to get that $20 unless somebody else starts asking questions.
I'm actually just curious because when you talk about things like R and Linux commoditizing, but Linux, I mean, I tend to think of a commodity being something where, there's something else just like it, on the shelf next to it, what makes it different. Linux is fairly unique in its place. It just isn't very business friendly these days.
Let me see if I can understand.
What do you mean when you say that it's becoming commoditized?
Oh, well, let's see. I can run, for the most part, I can run Solaris. I can run Windows. I can run Linux. Right? I can run HP UX. I can run all these. Basically, all provide the similar functionality, run about the same performance characteristics, right? But and Linux may be a cheaper alternative. Depends on what your support contract is for it. So did that answer the question? I'm not sure I was right on point.
I guess I think I'm just thinking too much from a desktop perspective where Windows is still far and away leading Linux.
Yeah.
But are you thinking more from a server perspective where Linux probably dominates?
Sure. Right. You have to imagine that when we're talking about those distributed computing models, that I'm much more interested in how Linux and Unix might serve me than Windows are. There's no doubt that Windows, still far and away, is leading the desktop market, although the iPad might begin to shift that a little bit. Right? Let me go back here for a second. Yeah.
My question relates to the late stages of analytics. You said it's stats.
Yeah.
So, even for optimization, somebody has to define the problem, what they're trying to optimize. But let's say the business comes to you, the business owner comes to you, but he doesn't have a clue about, he wants to improve his business, but it's like the unknown unknowns as Ramsfeld puts it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that go beyond the eighth way of optimization?
Well, so I'm going to try answering this way and see if I hit it, and if not, we can come back. If you go back to the late 80s, early 90s, there was a push for many of us to try to figure out how we could black box analytics to make it easy for anybody to consume. It was a huge, complete failure because in optimization you have to understand the problem constraints to be able to pick the right type of optimization. In predictive modeling you have to be able to pick the right type and approach to the modeling behavior, so you have to understand the right null hypothesis. In forecasting, there are several different forecasts you need to choose from to be able to have the right style of forecast. So what we learned, and in fact if you were to look at a SaaS as a business, you would see that in 1995 we started a big shift away from a tools basis to move to a solutions basis because we had learned from our customers that we needed to bake analytics directly into a business process. So if you look at our suite now, you would see we're doing Markdown Optimization for the marketer where we've already done the modeling activity that's appropriate for that retail piece. And the card fraud, where we're understanding fraud, for example, any of you have an HSBC card in here, credit card? Right? For those of you who do, every time you swipe that card, there's a SaaS program running to analyze for card fraud. Runs in 13 milliseconds. So the idea there is you have to bake the analytics now into a business process. I didn't get a chance to talk about rules engines and why I think rules engines are a complete disaster as they're developed from the IT side because they're all driven from heuristics, not from analytics. We've got one in the back here still. The question he's asking is, in particular with SaaS software, how much of that of the spend is on software and how much is on services? You would have to break that down into the different 3 tiers of types of products we deliver. One is the classic tools basis: data integration, data quality, business intelligence and reporting, and analytics. That is better than 95% is just a software sale. You move into the space of a sort of horizontal applications, marketing automation, campaign management. Those probably have beginning to get to a 50-50 of a split between services to instantiating either from ourselves or by our partners. Move into the large-scale applications like credit card fraud for HSBC or HBOS, and those are probably a third software, 2/3 consulting. Because of, and this goes back to your question about integration, the hard part is the integration to get these systems up and running. On average, we'd say 60% of the spend for every project is getting to the data, finding the right data, cleaning it up, and getting it prepared to put through the system. That's one of the real opportunities that we have to help figure out how to automate that process, because data is never going to be clean. So why do we try to pretend that as we build systems that consume data? One of the real problems with software as a service is onboarding data. Where do you do that? Where do you shore down the data to get it into the systems that are remote from you?
Talking about these real-time analysis systems that you're developing,
Yeah.
how are you safeguarding against misinformation being fed to these real-time systems?
Misinformation. So the question is, can we guard against misinformation? All systems can be gamed. Right? No surprises there. We do spend a lot of energy in understanding outliers, right? And there is a way. It's one of the things we do a lot is actually fraud detection. There's a lot of online fraud, which is very interesting. So eBay is an example, specifically PayPal. They do a lot of work with SaaS to understand the characteristics for payment fraud. They specifically randomize when they shut you off so that you actually can't trace the tree by which point they're making the decision. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but these are issues. How do people game systems? It's one of the interesting things about social networks. In the social media analysis, I was very pleased to see that the team had gone beyond not just looking at who had tweeted and who had blogged and who had blogged on YouTube. They had gone the next step, which is to find the centroid around where do these people that are blogging usually blogging. All right? So one of the things that we're doing a lot of work right now is actually in social network analysis for fraud in Medicare and in finance, to actually look for breakout fraud and fraud rings. Another huge problem because of the complexity of those rings as they attach. It's the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right, is a huge opportunity for understanding breakout fraud. Yes?
You spoke a little bit about where you thought computer science as a whole needed to go, and kind of implied that maybe the curriculum isn't giving students exactly what they need to bring the IT and the business side together. Do you have any more thoughts about that? And maybe where, what is it that, as a student, that we need to take out of, our time here at NC State, without, we've got a limited set of, courses that we can take.
Right.
We've got to get the basics of computer science and those core things. What else can the university do maybe to?
So there's 2 things specifically. First off, I'm actually very pleased with the scope and breadth of the computer science program here. Part of my message tonight is to make sure we don't lose sight that systems design, deep system engineering is an opportunity for computer science, because there's lots of management information science programs. They'll teach people who want to be in IT how to run IT, but really strong programs that teach people how to build these large-scale innovative systems to correct these problems. That's where I want you guys to be. And so continuing to grow the program to go deep here is my interest. And I think we're well situated, actually, with the skills that have been coming on here to really drive that curriculum. The piece that I'd like to add is how do we bring on some of the analytics more than just you need to go take a stats course. the thing that we have done is we've actually partnered with state. There's a Master's in Analytics program here, which is a 10-month program, which is a practicum of how do you look across all these problem sets and attach them to the business. So it's actually, there's a 10-month program here as a Master's in Analytics. There are things we can learn from that program to help provide the undergraduate program some view to, if you're interested in deep systems and solving systems, this is the type of curriculum and this is how you should augment that.
Maybe just one more.
Okay, all right, well.
Well, I wanted to understand this, that usually the businesses do not come up with a problem, asking for a solution unless they deal with the problem. And so they are less motivated towards giving you the revenue or providing you the revenue for the development of these technologies. So where do you think is the revenue is going to come from when you do not have that technical understanding from the CIOs of, say, Walmart or some kind of those companies which are not really dealing with technical stuff much? And so, and another question that leads to is that, do you think there is enough revenue, and is the amount of government involved in these kind of technical advancements, should it be, is it...
All right, he's rolling 3 questions into one here. I love it. All right. So, did most of you, were you able to hear the question in the back? Okay, so we're going to start first is there enough money? You better believe it. All right. Why do you think IBM bought SPSS? Why are they spending $150 million just on the ad campaign for a smart planet? All right. It's a huge understanding, whether it's SAP, SAS, IBM, Oracle, that this is the next real opportunity in systems, right? Because most of the plumbing is done. And so, is there opportunity? Yes. The governments need to stay out of it. All right. Let's let the market go. The first question, help me, was? Well,
how do you motivate these CIOs?
Yes. Primarily because we settled the line of business and ignored the CIO. Now, it's not, we don't like to be in that situation. It's a bad situation for a company to be in. Right? So to have to go to around IT to sell a business proposition doesn't make IT your friend. And we're spending more and more energy to try to bring those two together to make that work. But the truth is, if you go and pitch, I can improve your business, right, by reducing your churn of your customers by this percentage point, it goes directly to the bottom line, the spend shifts. Now, one of the things that constantly happens is the cycle for purchasing power constantly moves between IT and the business units, right? And it has to do with a variety of things. But if you looked at the .com bubble, you looked at Y2K, you looked at Sarbanes-Oxley and the control of data, you would see in the last few years we were in a shift to more control by IT. They were protecting the data, protecting the organization, protecting security. Most of those things are now falling to the wayside, and we're seeing a shift back to business spending and business owning what dollars are going to be spent on technology. So there's a constant cycle, and paying attention to that is really valuable. And I think you're shutting me off. Is that all right?
I am.
Okay. All right. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it. Thank you.